Hi, everyone. Welcome to Pardot Sandbox Testing Best Practices. I'm Celine Newsome. I'm going to be walking you through what a Pardot Sandbox is, some testing best practices. We're actually going to be talking through testing best practices, not only in Pardot Sandbox, but in Pardot production as well. We've got some bonus slides in there too, chatting with you guys about what the competition offers in case you're familiar with other marketing automation systems and their sandboxes. There's a lot of differences between the two. So got a lot to learn today. Let's jump in. First and foremost, does Pardot have a sandbox? Yes. There's also several other tools you can use for testing outside of a sandbox. Kind of teasing that testing in production intro line I had in there. Let's talk about your Pardot testing options first. Pardot offers training orgs, dev orgs. There is a slight differentiation between the two. You can request a training environment. They're provisioned after filling out a form, completely independent of your Pardot production org. You can use the training org to connect to a Salesforce production or sandbox org. Partner dev orgs. If you're a partner, you can request a developer org. It's a standard Salesforce developer org with full Pardot advanced license and some emailing limits in there too. But what we're going to be chatting about primarily today is Pardot Sandbox. Pardot Sandbox is basically an advanced business unit that you provision from your Salesforce sandbox, any Salesforce sandbox. You've got some customer must-haves that you see down on there. It is a paid edition, does come with some of the higher levels of Pardot, such as your advanced edition that you see there. Most importantly, one Pardot sandbox per Salesforce sandbox. There is a way to get more Pardot sandboxes depending on what Pardot edition you have or you choose to sign up for. And then, as you'll hear me say multiple times today, there's some really important training components when it comes to a Pardot sandbox. Two of them you see listed on this slide. Data and configurations cannot be shared between sandboxes and production accounts. What does this mean? This means changes must be manually recreated as you move to another sandbox or as you move from sandbox to production. So, no magical kind of push up and push down button. Again, anything you create in Sandbox must be manually recreated in production. Really, really big, important training tip there for how to use Pardot Sandbox. And then another really popular question I get is, can Pardot Sandboxes support things like sending emails? Or what about Salesforce Engage? Or what about B2B No, Pardot Sandbox doesn't support those things. So no email sending, no Salesforce Engage setup, no B2B setup. All of those things will be done and tested directly in production itself. Some more common Pardot Sandbox capability questions. Can you sync with multiple Salesforces? One Pardot Sandbox, one Salesforce Sandbox. You can have multiple Salesforce sandboxes, and if your Pardot edition allows for it, you could have another Pardot sandbox there that syncs just with that Salesforce sandbox. So one-to-one relationship there. Can you send emails? Email sending functionality is not available in your Pardot sandbox. Can you test Salesforce Engage? Pardot Sandbox cannot let you enable and test Salesforce Engage. Kind of goes hand in hand with the testing, sending email functionality, primarily what Engage is for, right? And without that capability, that functionality before it, makes Salesforce Engage something that you wouldn't test in Pardot Sandbox either. How do I move from Pardot Sandbox, all of those programs and automations I built, how do I move from that sandbox into production? You've got to log into your Pardot production, and then manually recreate everything in your Pardot production. So no magic push button again, got to manually create everything that you create in Sandbox. And then how is Sandbox different than maybe what you're used to if you have a Pardot training org? How is it different? First and foremost, training orgs expire after a year. And I can say from personal experience, I don't remember to reach out and have somebody renew it. And once it's retired, I've got to resubmit and kind of start from scratch there. You don't have to worry about that with a Pardot Sandbox. Let's quickly chat through what the competition offers in case you're familiar with other marketing automation systems and you've had the chance to work in their sandboxes. So Eloqua, another marketing automation system. If you're using the enterprise trim, their enterprise package, you automatically get a sandbox. If you're utilizing their first two features, basic or standard, this is add-on functionality. You can only push up to production setup from the sandbox. You can't push down, but that may be a big change if you're going to a Pardot Sandbox. You can't test landing pages without creating a new subdomain, and you can't test reporting. So reporting kind of apples to apples with that B2B MA reporting too that we said we can't test in Pardot. Marketo, first and foremost, biggest difference here, it's a purchase feature for all levels. It can't be synced to your regular CRM if it's already synced to your production instance. So you've got to be using your CRM's sandbox for sync. You can submit a support case requesting one-time instance copy to fill your sandbox with data. The instance copy will not bring over everything though, so little tidbit there. And then if you create a program and automation in your sandbox and you want to move it to production, you can perform something like a program import. Let's quickly chat last about HubSpot. HubSpot's version of Sandbox is called a development portal. It's free enterprise level of install. You can connect to a Salesforce production or a Salesforce Sandbox to a HubSpot production. Very similar to what we've chatted about. You have to rebuild all assets. So again, no push down to Sandbox. All right, let's get back to Pardot. Let's get back to the good stuff of a Pardot Sandbox. So we've got some testing best practices to take you through today. So should I test everything in my Pardot Sandbox? Well, we might have another trail for you to take. Certainly there's some things that you want to test in Sandbox, and let's start by chatting about that. These are some of those best practices that we recommend, always testing in a sandbox. Think about your data flow between Pardot and Salesforce. That's things like marketing data sharing rules and your connector user permissions and sharing rules. Anything related to your prospect sync, leads, contacts, person accounts. You want to make sure that that data is flowing back and forth as you expect it to. Sandbox is great for testing that. Sandbox is also great for testing sync behavior with large volume of records. Some ways to test that, think about exporting all of your prospects, making an arbitrary change to a synced field on all your records, importing that back into Pardot, watching that sync error list for problems. You're doing this to see how the system will respond to your large volume of records. That can help you answer questions like, how long is it going to take me to fill in the blank, export prospects, import prospects, make a change? And then that can better help you set up yourself for success in production because you'll be able to say, well, in Sandbox, it took me X amount of time. Great thing to test in your Pardot Sandbox. Field mapping and sync behavior, another great Sandbox testing best practice. So on your lead and contact fields, focus on fields that you're really going to be utilizing a lot in production, like personalization and segmentation. You don't need to create and map all of your fields. Do a subset. Do enough to make you feel comfortable, again, about how Pardot's going to work for creation, mapping, and syncing. And then your user sync. Map your Salesforce profiles to Pardot roles. Did it pull over as expected? Now, do you have your steps in place to be better successful in production when it comes to mapping? This is a really big thing for organizations that have a lot of Salesforce profiles and you're trying to map those to your Pardot roles, really creating a structured plan for when you move from Sandbox into production. That way you know exactly what to expect and how long it took you to map those profiles to roles. Now, as I've alluded to a couple of times, there are some things that we do recommend that you build directly in production. But as you see that trail master there calling out, building in production doesn't mean you skip testing. There's a lot of self-contained, harmless things like in Pardot functionality and assets that can be tested safely in production. Some of those things that you should build and test directly in production: email templates, forms, dynamic lists, scoring and grading. The full list that you see here, consider these things that you should move directly into production for. Now there's easy to test features, allowing you some security. When we say test emails in production, we don't mean kind of cross your fingers and hope that everything looks good. Pardot Production gives you some really great test features that you can utilize. You can send yourself test sentence. You can add yourself to a test list, an internal list. See how it looks on multiple browsers. If your Pardot edition supports rendering test, maybe familiar with litmus test, all you got to do is click that new render button, give it a couple minutes. You can see how your email looks on a variety of mobile clients, computer browsers as well. Go back into building, make some changes, run another test. Again, giving you that peace of mind, even though you're directly in production. And all of those items can be done before you send out an email to your customers. Same thing with testing personalization. You can actually preview what the email is going to look like with all of your personalization added by selecting an actual prospect and watching that pre-populated email come up. Again, you don't even have to send an email to them for you to see exactly what it's going to look like with all of your personalization applied. Pretty neat. All right, no special testing tools in production. Still want you to build in production, but still want you to verify. So build an asset, but act like a prospect. So things like forms, scoring, email preference center pages. Create a test prospect in your system, go through some of these actions, and verify that you get the outcome that you want. Some more build in productions, but with caution items: engagement studio, automation rules, lead assignment rules and processes, third-party integrations is another big one. And again, I just want to remind everybody about the why. There's no push to production button from Sandbox. So these items that you see listed above are pretty complex automations that take a lot of time to do right. So building it twice can take you and your team a significant amount of time and also increasing errors. Email engagement programs require many additional assets to be created, and adding that lost time, building it in 2 separate locations can really be a timeline hindrance on your team. Again, you can always test safely in production. So even though the word production's in there, just know we've already gone through some of those testing tools that you have available to you. Some more screenshots here of testing tools directly in production with some of those advanced automation features we just showed on the screen. Engagement programs are one of those. We know that they're very powerful, and we have to be intentional about how we build, but we also have to be intentional about how we test. You've got a test log feature in production. After you spend all of that time in production building your engagement studio programs, go to that test log. This never sends an email to you, to a client. It lets you test your flow, though, by giving you a log similar to what you see on the right-hand side of my screen. It's got dates. You can choose the path that it takes, and then you can say to yourself, is this what I expected? If yes, I think you're good to hit go. If no, go back over to build, make some edits, start a test over again. Really, really great testing tool. Same thing with complex automation rules. We know automation rules can change a lot of data. There's no undo button. So of course we recommend for you to test. You can build all of that logic and hit the preview button. That's what I'm showing you on the screen here, is that you can preview who's going to match that complex automation that you put together. Take a look at that list. If it's who you expected to be on that list, to match prospects, Then you have the confidence to hit run. Again, more testing directly in production, but being smart about it. Lead assignment, another really popular category that makes people scared sometimes to test directly in production. No problem. One of the best practices that we recommend is to name a test prospect something obvious. See in the middle of my screen there at the third bullet, we like starting it with 3 Z's in a row. That way, when you go through and you test your lead assignment process and you test your completion actions and forms and scores, you know that it's a test prospect because it starts with ZZZ. You can easily delete that data later in Salesforce if you need to, something like that. But this lets you test other areas of the system by acting like somebody real. Third-party integrations. We know these features vary widely, and testing in Sandbox might not work for them. You could certainly try, but there's not a lot of documentation on what Sandbox actually supports when it comes to your third-party integrations. So again, saving that time and the hassle, we just recommend moving directly into production. First and foremost, that's because Pardot Sandbox actually utilizes a totally different URL than production. I've got that URL listed right here at the top of the screen. It's that pi.demo.pardot.com. That might not be supported by the integration. It's hard to say. We know that there's a lot of other softwares that integrate with Pardot, but that's kind of my main call out there, that there's a wide range of functions that could be handled on a case-by-case basis. With that being said, considering the timeline, it's best that we just move all third-party integrations directly to production for testing. Guys, that's a wrap on Pardot Sandbox, testing best practices, Sandbox functionality, capabilities, what to test in Sandbox and what to test in production. Thank you guys for tuning in today. If you have any questions, I am happy to answer them. Take care.